Good start. Well, good morning. I should have cleared my throat before we came on the air. And welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I am your host, Frank Acom. We are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. And what a special show we have for you today. Assemblyman Phil Palmesano will be in later on to talk about the New York State budget. So make sure you stay tuned for that. And it's not too late to get your questions in. You see the number on the bottom of the screen. Yes, it's Phil Friday. He's going to join us this morning. Also, I'm going to note this throughout the morning, but I want to make a big deal about this because we're trying to spread the word. You know, I've done this before on the radio show as well as the television show. Today is Rock and Roll Hall of Famer and Corning native Duane Eddy's birthday. So put on some Rebel Rouser or whatever your favorite, your classic Duane Eddy song is this morning in honor of his 86th birthday. Did you know back in 1958, his album Have Twangy Guitar Will Travel sold over 6 million copies and stayed on the charts for 82 weeks. And I always mention in the original biography when he was really taking off, at that time when he was becoming so famous, so known for that twang sound, really revolutionizing the way guitar would be played, that in his first promotional biography, it said, quote, "Perhaps the town of Corning, New York, is unaware that rock and roll star Duane Eddy was born here in 1938. And so when I hear that, perhaps the town doesn't know, the city of Corning doesn't know. That's why I've made it a goal, and there's others involved as well, of course, to make sure that Corning and the surrounding areas know that Duane Eddy, Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, was born right here in Corning, and he moved to Bath, Penn Yan, and he talks about the surrounding areas with such love. He's promoted Corning, being born in Corning, his whole career and his whole life. So I mention it to kick off the program as we celebrate Duane Eddy's birthday here. And if you are new to the program, look at all these waves coming. Thank you. If you're new to the program, we were very honored to have Duane on very early in the program. I want to say perhaps the first month or so. So we'll be talking about that throughout the morning. If you want to talk about Duane Eddy, I'd love to. It's a topic I'd always like to discuss. All right. Unfortunately, the protests are spreading. This is no surprise. This goes back to my opinion on this, that this is a quote-unquote cool thing to do. This is very much the social media thing to do, where students may not even know that they're protesting and what they're protesting, even though we've seen it's anti-Israel, very often anti-American, anti-police. They may not even know why they're there, but it's a party. And in the days when parties were, you think of college keg parties and those type of things, Animal House perhaps, that was the cool thing. Now apparently the cool thing is to scream anti-Israel and anti-Semitic statements, take your photos, preferably with a mask on, and get as many likes and as many follows as you possibly can. We actually have too many to list of where this is spread. And I also want to highlight, do not be surprised because of the poor handling of this at all the, not all the, but the majority of these colleges and universities, the poor handling of this. Do not be surprised if we see this happening in high schools, where that'll be the next step. Because remember, this is the popular thing to do. This is the fad. So do not be surprised when you hear about a high school having students walking out. Columbia University, the Faculty Senate is expected to vote on a resolution. I'm just going to give you a quick rundown. There's others. This is just kind of a short list that CNN put together. I also want to preface this by saying CNN still calls them pro-Palestinian protests, so they're coming at it in a slanted, biased way, because there's no other way to look at it, in my opinion, than anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. But the Faculty Senate is expected to vote on a resolution admonishing the school's president, Shafiq, on Friday over several of her decisions, according to the New York Times. Shafiq has faced criticism for authorizing police to shut down student protests on campus. That is the problem. The problem isn't that she's let the students run amok. It's not the fact that really the kids have taken over the school and are now, I guess, in leadership positions. That's not the problem. The problem is she had the audacity to call the police and enforce the rules of the college campus. Keep that in mind. So when you say, good, she's being admonished for all the wrong reasons by the faculty senate. And yes, very often, we're not going to be able to get to all of it this morning, but very often faculty and staff have become involved. I saw a clip this morning of and I can't remember which university, they're starting to blend together, being arrested for joining in the protest, but I'll continue. University of Southern California, the university canceled its main commencement ceremony. We're going to talk about that extensively. They actually talk about perhaps the biggest heckler's veto cave-in of all time. They canceled their main commencement ceremony next month, citing new safety measures in place. So instead of saying, hey, we have a job to do to keep our students safe, whether they're Jewish students or any student, instead of saying that, they said, well, let these anti-Israel protests rule and dictate what we do here on college campus. And the saddest part about this, the heartbreaking part, and I am going to talk about it more in just a little bit, the heartbreaking part is many of these students had to do their graduation during COVID online. And now as they have what should be one of the proudest days of their life, graduating from a university, they now have to have a lessened graduation because of, at this point, you can say selfish, anti-Israel protests. Emory University, 28 people were arrested, including 20 Emory community members during a protest at the school. Vice President for Public Safety, Cheryl Elliott, said in her statement, troopers deployed pepper balls to control the unruly crowd during the protest. Georgia State Patrol said as well. A group of Democratic Georgia state lawmakers condemned the excessive force used by Georgia State Patrol during arrests. This is going to be a new trend as well, so buckle up. The problem is going to be that police get involved. There's not going to be pushback about losing and caving to these agitators and letting your campuses be overrun. That's not the problem. And again, this is coming from CNN, so take it with a grain of salt. But the problem, as you can see in this writing, is going to be when you get police involved to enforce the rules, enforce the laws. And there's an example of that when AOC called this out and the NYPD responded. We'll get to that a little bit later on. At Brown University, the university identified about 130 students who had alleged violated a school conduct code that forbids encampments on campus. Students found responsible will be disciplined depending on their behavior and other factors, including any prior conduct violations. At Emerson College, more than 100 people were arrested and 4 police officers injured during an encampment clearing at the Boston Liberal Arts College. President Jay Bernard said he recognized and respected, quote, the civic activism and passion that sparks the protest after dozens of arrests. Indiana University, 33 people were detained because of an encampment. George Washington University, D.C. Metropolitan Police were asked to assist in relocating an unauthorized protest encampment on campus. The decision came after multiple instructions made by George Washington University PD to relocate to an alternative demonstration site on campus went unheeded by encampment participants. At the University of California, Los Angeles, a demonstration with encampments formed at UCLA on Thursday. Northeastern University, an encampment formed at Northeastern University. Other campuses, since last Thursday, there have been protests at several campuses. Massachusetts Institute of Technology, University of Texas at Austin, University of Michigan, University of New Mexico, University of California, Berkeley, Yale University, Harvard University, Princeton University, and University of Minnesota's Twin City campus. Whew. Now, one that they forgot hits a little bit closer to home, right in our backyard, compared to other universities, not living up to the standards you may have held them to when it comes to protests. But Cornell University, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. NYC, New York City College, is really getting nasty. We'll talk about that when we come back. Even the daily news reporting on the blatant anti-Semitism. And that's what's so frustrating in a lot of the news coverage. Yes, I've already said how many times that calling them pro-Palestinian protests are doing their audience a disservice, and it's also disgraceful because it's worse than that. But they are not reporting on what some are, the language and what is being said by these protesters. The blatant hatred and vitriol, the blatant call for violence and destruction, it is sickening. And that is not being reported on. It's just headlines like pro-Palestinian protesters get arrested. So that puts the problem not on the anti-Semitic protest. It puts the problem on the police. That the police are the problem in this scenario. That's why Columbia University president is getting admonished, because she had the audacity to get police involved to enforce the rules and the laws. So we're going to talk about that when we come back. We will be focusing heavily on that because in the next hour we'll talk with Assemblyman Phil Palmesano, so we'll completely change it up. There are a couple things about the presidential race I'd like to get to as well. I will talk about Cornell. We'll talk about, well, I don't want to give too much away. I want to take a break. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking. Here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Got a couple comments already going this morning, and thank you for all the waves. First comment. Dwayne, I apologize. I've got a frog in my throat. Dwayne Eddy is awesome. He drew the Mustang for Penyan Academy. I knew that. Isn't that cool? I think he talked about it one time during one of our interviews. But he is awesome, and the music is... I know I'm going to be listening to it all day. So Dwayne Eddy, if you're just joining us, Corning native, Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, Musicians Hall of Fame, Grammy Award winning, I should also mention Steuben County Hall of Fame. Dwayne Eddy is celebrating his 86th birthday today. Next up, you may be right that they don't know what they are protesting. But what could be scarier is if they do know what they're protesting. Well, and that's a very good point. What I would say is there are definitely some that know exactly what they're saying and doing. But then there's and you know who it is. You had people that you grew up with that were like this, just following the trends. Not leaders, followers. And they say, wow, this is what the cool kids are doing. I don't agree with that sentiment, but that's what they think. This is what the cool kids are doing. I'm going to do what they do. It's the would you jump off a bridge if your friends told you to scenario. In this case, yes, an anti-Semitic bridge. I'm going to try to, in the next comment, this is kind of tough to do on the fly, but I'm going to try. Let's see if it works. And it does not. Okay, that's why I shouldn't have done it on the fly. There is a post from the New York Post, just came out, and thank you for bringing this to my attention. It is George Soros is paying student radicals who are fueling nationwide explosion of Israel-hating protests. This is relatively breaking news, I guess. I'm being told it was posted at 6. George Soros and his hard-left acolytes are paying agitators who are fueling the explosion of radical anti-Israel protests at colleges across the country. Now we could talk about all the copycats. And they have a map. So, again, check this out. The New York Post have a map of where these have all sprung up, and it's really, really interesting. Well, the SJP parent organization has been funded by a network of nonprofits, ultimately funded by, among others, Soros, the billionaire left-wing investor. All 3 colleges, the protests are being encouraged. At 3 colleges, the protests are being encouraged by paid radicals who are fellows of a Soros-funded group called the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights. USCPR provides up to $7,800 for its community-based fellows and between $2,880 and $3,660 for its campus-based fellows in return for spending 8 hours a week organizing, quote, campaigns led by Palestinian organizations. They are trained to, quote, rise up to revolution. So, again, we can't go through the whole piece here with all the names, and it gets a little much. But it is very interesting. I have not had a chance to read it all either. Yeah, I will be. But New York Post breaking there, Soros funded. Okay, so anti-Israel protesters set up at NYC College. With their hands up, the anti-Israel mob forced the guards, the public safety officers, to walk backwards away from the encampment towards a set of steps where NYPD officers had congregated. The protesters then formed a wall and ascended the steps, forcing the cops back as well. They listed their demands. That 1, divest, 2, boycott, 3, solidarity, 3, demilitarize, and Did I screw that up? 4, demilitarize. 5, a people's Cooney. And then others posting disclose, divest, demand. And it always goes back to demand, doesn't it? List of demands. We have a few. It's going to be extensive when we read it from Cornell, because Cornell is another place that has not been mentioned yet at places like CNN and elsewhere. But again, that's why that map with the New York Post, and I don't even know if that's completely extensive, but they show on there University of Rochester, another place where this has exploded. So if you look at the map, it continues to expand. University of Pittsburgh, as I mentioned, Cornell, Yale, of course, as you are aware. The Daily Mail even calling out the anti-Semitism. Daily Mail, kind of a far-left publication in New York City, calls for the end of Israel erupt at City College of New York encampment, where, quote, Zionists get driven off. Anti-Israel chants erupted late Thursday at pro-Palestinian encampments. See, still saying pro-Palestinian encampments at City College of New York, where one passerby was driven away when a protester claimed she could, quote, smell he was a Zionist, end quote. But again, these are peaceful protests. These are peaceful pro-Palestinian protests. Concerns about anti-Semitism at protests sweeping campuses around the nation has grown in recent days. On Thursday night, protesters at the campus were seen booing a passerby and driving him away from the demonstration. I can sniff you. We can all sniff you, one protester sneered at the man. We can smell the Zionist on you. I could tell he was Zionist. They victimized themselves so quickly, she said. Later in the night, chants like, and pardon my language, Israel go to hell broke out among the crowd of about 100, down from a peak of roughly 250 protesters. Other chants, if you're curious, 1, 2, 3, 4, Israel no more. That doesn't have the cadence, does it? But that's what they went for. 5, 6, 7, 8, Israel will eliminate. So remember this, and this is not rare. Remember this when you see the media report it as mostly peaceful. It's always mostly peaceful. Mostly peaceful pro-Palestinian protests, when it is nothing more than anti-Israel. It's violent, anti-Israel, anti-American, anti-police, anti-Semitic protests. Now, Columbia University students, and I'm not going to go through all of this either, but Columbia University students from Israel recounts encountering hate before and during the encampment. So this is not new. This has been boiling up for a long time. This is just them acting on their hate. And it goes through a student from Israel that attends Columbia University and what he has went through the last 3 years studying there. It's heartbreaking, being spit on, things like that. You can find this for yourself at amny.com. We're breezing through a lot of this because I'm, again, trying to highlight how disingenuous the media has been in their coverage in most instances. Also, well, let's keep talking about the hate. First of all, did you see progress in negotiations between Columbia protesters and administrators? I'm confused, and help me with this. I'm not always the best at math. If Tuesday was the deadline and they extended it 48 hours, shouldn't we be looking at an end to the encampment like very soon? Negotiations between Columbia University administrators and pro-Palestinian protesters who've been occupying a campus lawn with a sprawling encampment, quote, have shown progress and are continuing as planned, the school said. For several days, a small group of faculty, administrators, and university senators have been in dialogue with student organizers to discuss the basis for dismantling the encampment, dispersing, and following university policies going forward. We have our demands, they have theirs. Columbia announced late Tuesday that it had given protesters a midnight deadline to agree to dismantle their encampment. But the university then said earlier Wednesday that it had extended the talks for another 48 hours. If no agreement is reached, the school has said it will consider alternative options, which many protesters have interpreted to mean calling in police to clear the site. Again, remember how the media covers this. The problem in all of this is not the hate speech that we've been hearing. It's not the calls for violence and calls for destruction. The problem in all this is the president has the audacity to call the police so that there are actual repercussions for breaking the rules and the laws of Columbia University. We've got more to talk about, but I'm running late. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Keep those comments coming in. This is Frankly Speaking. Thank you so much for joining us here on Frankly Speaking, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio on Market Street in Corning. Unfortunately, we're discussing more about the protests on college campuses, and as I've mentioned, my prediction is it will be high schools next. It'll be protests in the streets because people want to join in what is the trend. Unfortunately, yes, anti-Israel, anti-Semitic protests are a trend now. At UPenn, a sophomore student, Abraham Franchetti, said, I think the bottom line is they need to clear out this encampment just like the folks did at UT Austin. These people represent a distraction and a threat and a source of fear to actual dues-paying students. Well, if you look at what USC did, and they caved so badly that they canceled main stage graduations. Now, if you recall earlier this week on the show, and I've been mentioning what it's going to look like at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, but I also said earlier in the week what is going to happen. It might have even been last week. What is going to happen at these graduations? Will they cave and actually cancel them? Because there'll definitely be disruptions. Because imagine if they think they have it under control, right? Imagine if they think, all right, we can have our graduation. Any university says we can have our graduation. All these kids have been sharing the photos of them at the encampment and how they care the most and they're the most woke. Imagine if they could then take it the next step and disrupt graduation. And then everybody in that room sees them. Then they are the social justice warrior star. So it's going to be a headache, and it's going to be a headache at a lot of universities. But to cancel the main stage graduation ceremony, the University of Southern California scrapped its main stage graduation ceremony as the campus has been overrun with anti-Israel protests that have led to the arrests of nearly 100 students. The university blamed, quote, new safety measures put in place this year for the cancellation of the 65,000 in-person ceremony at Alumni Park. Quote, we understand that this is disappointing. However, we are adding many new activities and celebrations to make this commencement academically meaningful, memorable, and uniquely USC, including places to gather with family, friends, faculty, and staff, the celebratory releasing of the doves, and performance by the Trojan Marching Band. Now, there's been other issues because the valedictorian, if you recall, this was earlier, had been accused of promoting anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist rhetoric over social media. So they're concerned at what she would say in her speech. So now they're canceling the main stage graduation over these protests. That has received, needless to say, a lot of backlash. I mean, it's cowardly. It's pathetic. And again, they have allowed students to run the schools, that they are allowing students, certain students, there's a hierarchy. Certain students are allowed to make other students, and in this case, Jewish students, feel unsafe, fear for their lives. And again, I think a lot of it is the cash cow idea, but that is how cowardly that they are. So think about we've talked about earlier in the week, but the breach of a contract here, when you sign up to go to school there, you go there 4 years. And I think as a parent or a grandparent, you would expect that one of the major jobs of administration, if not the major job, is to keep your child safe. And instead, they, when pushed, instantly give in and say, we're not going to protect your child. We're going to protect these children. We're not going to protect your child. Fox News national correspondent Bill Mulligan reported USC announces it's canceling its main stage commencement ceremony. And then they put the comments on the website that announced it off. You couldn't comment. Brutal. Now this is the heartbreaking part to me. Brutal for the class of 2024. Likely didn't get a high school graduation during COVID in 2020, and now won't get a traditional college graduation. Think of that. So they had to do a virtual. My headphones just fell apart. A virtual graduation from high school, and now a non-traditional college graduation. Just a disgrace. Have the graduation and arrest anyone who disrupts it, said Fox News contributor Mark Theisen. Representative Rudy Yakam, a Republican from Indiana, said students, families, and friends all look forward to celebrating graduation. Now, because of the pro-Hamas mob, they can't. This shouldn't be happening in America. Others saying this is beyond unacceptable. I would agree. Tom Hurden, a hedge fund manager, wrote, USC has gone from banning the student commencement speaker to canceling its entire graduation ceremony in a couple of weeks. Thanks for the $340,000. We'll mail you the diploma, maybe. I'd be, and he doesn't use this word, but I will, I'd be mad if I was a parent or a graduate. Yeah. So, yeah, $340,000, which I know it'll probably be erased here pretty soon as we near election. So they probably won't have to worry about paying it anyway. But you pay that kind of money, and the university, after paying $340,000, says, we can't keep your child safe. We can't punish these agitators, because then we'll look bad as if we support the police in some way or we support law and order. And that is the unfashionable thing to be on. Hence the reason why Colombia's president is being admonished for calling in the police to enforce the rules and the laws. As Tommy Lawrence said, caving to campus terrorists. And that's what it is. First of all, they started negotiating with the campus terrorists, and now they're caving to them. That's what the grown-ups, the leaders in the room, that is their response. The problem is, in all of this, it's going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to expand. As I said, it's going to be at high schools. It's going to be on the streets. Because this has all been spreading like wildfire, not just because of, as we mentioned, the New York Post having that piece that is funded by various Soros organizations, but it's also because it is going to be the in thing. And as I mentioned, right down the road, Cornell students have joined in the anti-Israel protests. Now, kind of late to the party, number one. Number two, not necessarily what you would think when it comes to powerful protests from Ithaca. This coming from the Ithaca Voice. The crowd around the camp on the Arts Quad was largely dispersed after several hours spent alternating between rallying and locking arms in a human chain. Sounds kind of awkward. This was last updated at 11:30 p.m. About 30 people are sleeping in the encampment overnight, though the environment turned tense around 8 p.m. when the permit the group was using to occupy the Arts Quad expired. Cornell police were only seen in passing. Around 10 p.m., protesters in the encampment told the crowd still gathered, which had dwindled to about 40 from its peak of around 300 earlier in the day, to return at 6 a.m. on Friday as their camping continues. So down to just 40 at 10 p.m. It's fun to hang around the tents on a nice sunny day yesterday, but when it starts to get chilly at night, that's when the crowd disperses to just 40. Yesterday, Cornell University Vice President Joel Molina issued a letter outlining the school's response to the encampment. Molina recounted the discussions between administrators and students, further detailed, during which officials offered students space to put up their tents. So we'll give you space. We got street sweepers, if you hear that noise. He said the tents are a violation of university policy since they were not registered, and the group who reserved the quad until 8 p.m. Climate Justice Cornell stated there would not be tents. Melania maintained that free and open expression, including peaceful protest, is core to Cornell's values. The students declined to move the tents. Molina said as a result, they will face punishment. They said suspensions will be issued for participating students, and faculty and staff who participate will be referred to the school's Human Resources Department. Do you see any scenario where faculty and staff get in any sort of trouble? That this is not an outcome we welcome. We want to provide avenues for everyone to make their voices heard, but this must be done in ways that respect the policies we have in place to protect the public health and safety of our community and the rights of all to do their work. So when we come back from this break, yes, we do have to take a break. When we come back from this break, I will give you their list of demands at Cornell, right down the road. Cornell, we have so much to get to. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. And we are back with Frankly Speaking. Still working on my headphones here. Broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. Today is Dwayne Eddy's birthday, as we've been mentioning all morning long. Dwayne Eddy, Corning native, Rock and Roll Hall of Famer. Put on some Dwayne Eddy music this morning. Have some fun. Because what we're bringing up on the show is not a lot of fun. So Cornell is starting to see the protests that are spreading across the nation. As I mentioned. Now, the group doing this released their list of demands. Remember, that's always a part of this. Very often, they are, what's the word I want to use? Fantastical, not really something that can be accomplished. But this is what the group's list of 9 demands entitled at Cornell, right down the road. 1, acknowledge its role in the national genocide of indigenous people through the Morrill Act and its sale of nearly 977,909 acres of indigenous land. Return all mineral interests to tribal nations disposed by the Morrill Act. Provide restitution for the dispossessed nations. Provide restitutions for the Cayuga nations. Establish an indigenous studies department and return surplus land in New York State to the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Lenni Lenape, and their descendants who have been forced out of New York. Okay, so as you can see, this is kind of typical of Cornell, not focused on one issue. And that happens very often with the list of demands. It starts with, this is what we want. And when they see administration capitulate, they say, okay, you know what we actually want? We want a lot more. Number 2, annually disclose a comprehensive account of its endowment and land holdings and divest from entities involved in morally reprehensible activities in accordance with Cornell's 2016 standard to guide divestment considerations. 3, end profit-generating partnerships, volunteer arrangements, and other significant corporate and academic affiliations with institutions involved in morally reprehensible activities, including, but not limited to, the dissolution of the Jacobs Technion Cornell Institute and all other partnerships with the Technion Israel Institute of Technology. 4, now we get to it, call for an unconditional permanent ceasefire in Gaza. Like the ceasefire on October 6th, right? Is that what they're mentioning? They want to return to the ceasefire like we saw on October 6th. 5, establish a Palestinian studies program housed in the College of Arts and Sciences, along with an accredited minor that is available to all undergraduate and graduate students. Representatives from Cornell's chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine and Cornell Collective for Justice in Palestine must serve on the committees that oversee the hiring of the program's faculty. This is why demands get so under my skin. You must do this. All right. And 6, publicly acknowledge and protect anti-Zionist speech, viewpoints, and histories in both religious and academic contexts. Recognize the legitimate and historical claims that anti-Zionist is not anti-Semitism. 7, remove all police from campus. What did I say? Anti-Semitic, anti-police, anti-America, very often the talking points of these protests. But continuing. Remove all police from campus, beginning with the elimination of police presence at demonstrations. Replace police with an emergency response team composed of healthcare workers and first responders, trained in de-escalation. A majority of team members must be providers who share lived experiences and identities with Cornell's diverse student bodies. Wow, that would get kind of complicated. A majority of team members must be providers who share. So again, this is the emergency team, not police. They don't want police anymore. This is a whole different setup. Who share lived experiences and identities with Cornell's diverse student body. That could get tricky. 8, ensure total legal and academic amnesty for all individuals involved with the liberated zone and related demonstrations. I thought they said there was 9, but they only show the 8. But for some reason, I thought I heard 9. So there you are. There may be another one missing from my extensive list. That is what they are demanding at Cornell. Cornell now a little late to the party, but getting in on the anti-Israel, pro-Hamas rallies. Now, earlier in the show, I mentioned, do these students that are protesting, do they know what they're actually saying? I think some do. I think some of the professional agitators, the ones that the New York Post talking about today in reference to George Soros-funded organizations, I think they know exactly what they're doing. I do think there are others who aren't quite well versed in what they're saying. That we're going to talk about when we come back. Got to play a little catch up because I'm going on tangents this morning, but we're having a lot of fun just with down topics. But we're still having a good morning here on Frankly Speaking, so stay with us. Yes, we are now 2 hours long here on Frankly Speaking. Thank you for setting your alarms and joining us. Here it is, 6:45 already, almost done with the first hour of Frankly Speaking. In the next hour, Assemblyman Phil Palmesano will be our guest. So get your questions in for him. So I had mentioned, do these protesters know what they're saying, what they're doing? I believe some do, but I think there are a lot there that are just following the trends, want to be in with the quote-unquote cool kids. There is a viral video that is now out. Now, it's anecdotal. It's 2 Columbia students. But they were asked about the goals. The first student said, I think the main goal is just showing our support for Palestine and demanding that NYU stop. I honestly don't know all of what NYU is doing. Realizing they started this sentence before they could finish it. They should stop. Oh, I don't know what they should stop. Asked if there was something NYU is doing, the student meekly replied, I really don't know. I'm pretty sure they are. She then turns to her friend and asked, do you know what NYU is doing here? The friend, who was wearing a face mask, of course, said, about what? And it gets worse. Well, why are you protesting? Protester 1, I don't know. I'm pretty sure there's something about Israel. Turns to the other person, says, why are we protesting? Protester number 2, I know this sounds like a bad sketch. I wish I was more educated, says protester number 2. Protester number 1, admitting, I'm not either. I wish I was more educated. Well, that's what you should be going to classes for. Not out causing others to miss classes. Again, how angry would you be if you're paying that kind of money? Man. And if you look at the polls, and this is Harvard Kennedy School's Institute of Politics, they released in the spring, now, a poll of young voters 18 to 29. Of the 2010 Americans polled, 5-1 favor a permanent ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas conflict. 51% support, 10% oppose. While majorities of young Americans sympathize with Israelis and the Palestinian people. However, attention paid to the conflict did not seem to mirror the strong sentiments seen on U.S. campuses across the country. While only 38% of young Americans tell us they are following the news about the war between Israel and Hamas very or somewhat closely, the proposition rises among registered voters, 45, and those most likely to vote November, 52. So again, 38% of young Americans tell this pollster that they're even following it. So this, again, is more about the look at me, look at what I'm doing. Now, going back to the real concern in the media and with certain politicians is not the disruption of campus. It's not the disruption of students that now feel unsafe and cannot go to class, or their graduation is being canceled, whatever. That's not the problem. The violent anti-Semitic protests are not the problem, or the students that have been affected by this. The real problem is police were called in. AOC, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, slammed Columbia University, saying, not only did Columbia make the horrific decision to mobilize NYPD on their own students, but the units called in have some of the most violent reputations on the force. So there you are. You see the anti-police sentiment. NYPD had promised the city they wouldn't deploy SRG to protest. So why are these counter-terror units here? Well, NYPD Chief of Patrol John Chell decided that he wasn't going to sit idly by and hear what AOC had to say. So he responds, truly amazing. Columbia decided to hold its students accountable to the laws of the school. They are seeing the consequences of their actions, something these kids were most likely never taught. Good SAT scores and self-entitlement do not supersede the law. What a great point. These units remove students with great care and professionalism. Not a single incident was reported. The only incidents that day on campus were the students' hateful, anti-Semitic speech and vile language towards our cops. I'm sure you agree any hateful speech is unacceptable. You should rethink your commitment to a simple thank you, or you should rethink your comments to a simple thank you to the NYPD, and hate has no place in our society. Maybe you should walk around Columbia and NYU and listen to the remarks of pure hatred. I will ensure those units will protect you, as they do for all New Yorkers. And I love that line. Good SAT scores and self-entitlement do not supersede the law. Self-entitlement is a great way to describe what we're seeing. But I'm glad that he has highlighted as well the hate. Because, again, we hear from the left that hate is unacceptable. There's no place for hate. Then why is this hate against Jewish people okay? Is that the only acceptable hate? That's where this gets very confusing. And that's why they twist themselves up into a pretzel and not report on the hate speech. They don't report on the violence. They say peaceful protests. They say pro-Palestinian protest. So I'm glad that he said hate has no place in our society. I'm sure you agree any hateful speech is unacceptable. Can they agree to that? Is any hateful speech unacceptable? I'm not sure that they could agree to that now, because they would, again, have to kind of mince their words on how they would describe it. It is very interesting. We've got to take a break, though. Boy, this show is going fast. We're nearly done with our discussion on college campuses. We are going to get to a couple things here about the presidential race, and then we have Assemblyman Phil Palmesano coming up. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. And we are back, Frankly Speaking, here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Thank you so much for joining us, wrapping up the first hour of our broadcast. Mike Johnson hit back at Ilhan Omar's absurd criticism. You may recall we brought up that criticism yesterday, saying he was fanning the hate and the violence. Ilhan Omar, though, had no problem visiting Columbia yesterday with her daughter. They got arrested there, so I'm concerned. Mike Johnson did respond, though, says it's absurd. It's absolutely absurd for her to say that. It's incredible that I was going there to meet with and speak out on behalf of Jewish students. Safety could be seen as divisive in any way. This is exactly the problem. It's actually an issue that ought to be uniting every elected official. But some of these folks are afraid to speak out, and others, like my colleague Omar, are saying exactly the wrong thing. Look, if these universities would be held accountable and then protect their students on campus, we wouldn't need to be there. We wouldn't need to speak out. And the House has taken action to do everything that's within our power, and we're going to do more. But we need everybody who has a platform, every elected official, to be on the right side of this. And sadly, some of them are doing exactly the wrong thing. Some GOP lawmakers are demanding major donors pull funding. I don't think they're demanding, they're suggesting. See, demanding is starting to get a little overused. Pull funding from Columbia over anti-Semitic incidents. Senator Josh Hawley, said Jewish Americans fear for their lives because of bougie jihadists. I like that. Bougie. What a great way of putting that. He labeled the anti-Israel protesters bougie jihadists. Again, to my point, that this is all about showing that you're really the elite. in the woke world, that you're going to go viral with your photos. Well, he said, well, sure. I mean, this is all about the fact that he has a pro-Hamas base, meaning, who was this that he's referring to? Oh, Senator, pardon me, I'm trying to rush through too much here at the end. He's talking about Biden here. Well, sure, that's because he's got the pro-Hamas base. But listen, Eisenhower did the right thing back in 57 when he sent the 101st Airborne to Little Rock. Why not do it for Jewish Americans? I mean, it shouldn't be that in the country in this day and age that if you are a Jewish American, you fear for your life because of all of these bougie jihadists at these universities whose brains are addled by TikTok are out there calling for your death, calling for the destruction of the state of Israel. I mean, what is going on these campuses? Send in the National Guard and wake these kids up. They ought to know they can't do this. They ought to know they don't have any right to occupy these campuses. They don't have any right to threaten their fellow students. They ought to snap them out of it, and the National Guard would help them do that. And to that point, Ron DeSantis saying unruly, anti-Jewish, pro-Hamas protesters will be expelled from Florida universities. You think about what happened when you have these Hamas demonstrators out. They're taking over bridges. They're taking over roads. How do you know? Someone may need to get to a hospital. Someone may need to pick up a child somewhere. And you're just going to commandeer the road? We're not going to tolerate you. You look at these universities. When we have students who are doing things that, I mean, some of the stuff with the Hamas, I think it's absurd that someone would go out and demonstrate on that. But you know, when you're chasing Jewish students around, when you're not letting a Jewish professor enter a building, when you're targeting people like that, that's not free speech. And these administrators and the president of these universities are weak, they're scared, and they don't do anything. You do that in Florida, at our universities, we're showing you the door. You're going to be expelled when you're doing that stuff. And you know what? The minute people start to face consequences, you're not going to see this nonsense going on. Well, and that's the point. There are no consequences. The problem in this is when they actually have to get consequences. When the police are called in, they're not used to that. They're allowed to run roughshod. They're not used to being punished in any way, shape, or form because they're in an elite class. We have to take a break and start hour number 2. So stay with us. This is, frankly speaking, here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Well, good morning. I hit the wrong button. Welcome back, or welcome to, frankly speaking, depending on what time you get up. But this is hour number 2 of Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. And it is, if you're just joining us, Corning native and rock and roll Hall of Famer Duane Eddy's birthday. So we wish Duane Eddy a happy 86th birthday. We'll put on maybe Rebel Rouser, one of your favorites, throughout the day. Duane was born in Corning on April 26, 1938. Today is his 86th birthday. If you don't know about Duane Eddy, we had interviews with him in the past on this show, and on radio as well, trying to spread the word that Duane Eddy was born in Corning, one of the last of the great legends who started rock and roll, his twang sound. I would highly recommend, if you're not familiar with it, do a little research, put on a little music, and relax and enjoy what is, I don't even think arguably, the greatest rock and roll instrumentalist of all time, creating that twang sound that revolutionized rock and roll. I wanted to quickly, because earlier we were talking about college campuses, and we've got a couple quick things here before Assemblyman Phil Palmesano joins us. Oh, you know what? First, here we go. We mentioned Duane Eddy, and I wanted to show this picture. That's when Duane visited not that long ago, a few years back, and he took his photo. I was there. I might have taken the photo, as a matter of fact, or it might have been his wife, Deed, of him pointing up to the mural over on Bridge Street in Corning. That's him. I don't know if you can see it great, but that's a mural of him in the window playing his guitar. So there you are. Thought I'd show you that real quick. Also, since we're going through picture shows, slideshows, our friends at the Paint and Post Food Pantry, I tell you about their nutrition workshop. Well, they sent some cool photos from yesterday's nutrition workshop. Let's see if I can go through them. There we go. Some of the things that you learn. Just giving you an idea. So on the fourth Wednesday of every month, you can join them at 10:30 to 11:30 at the United Church of Paint and Post, 201 North Hamilton Street in Paint and Post. And let's see what the final creation was. Looks delicious. So thank you to our friends from the Food Pantry for sending that to us. If you are just joining us, we will have Assemblyman Phil Palmesano in to talk about the budget here in just a little bit. Did you see that President Biden visited Syracuse yesterday. Now, he did not. Some people were speculating he may go visit Columbia. I never speculated that. And he did not. But he visited upstate New York with Governor Kathy Hochul and Senator Chuck Schumer to celebrate up to $6 billion in federal funding for a semiconductor factory. $6 billion. Boy, we throw around a lot of money. But they started talking about the protests in relationship to Hochul, and this is Politico. And they said, well, Mike Johnson visited, and Hochul was really critical of that. That, too, was a contrast from Hochul, who posted Wednesday evening on X that she was having an all-around beautiful day in the neighborhood as she took a stroll through Central Park, eating a soft pretzel and taking selfies next to blossoming trees. State Senator Jack Martins, chair of the Senate Republican Working Group on Anti-Semitism, said the governor's visit to Syracuse and Central Park showed she's more interested in photo ops than keeping students safe. There are kids who are being told they can't or shouldn't go to school and they shouldn't stay home, and the campus is shut down for remote learning. And she's walking through Central Park having a soft pretzel. It's a wonderful day. That kind of cluelessness, frankly, cannot be ignored. At a time when we need leadership, once again, the governor has come up way short. So that's kind of a combination. Biden and New York update. Okay, where do we want to go from here? Okay, I mentioned this yesterday with the Trump numbers in Pennsylvania, and I've had some people talk to me about it. So Trump, I don't remember what the exact number was, how many people voted for Nikki Haley kind of in a protest vote against Trump in Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, the number doesn't stick with me. But there was also a protest vote against Biden where the write-ins exceeded 60,000 in the Pennsylvania Democratic primary after uncommitted campaign in PA. The wave of write-ins amounted to 5.6% of the vote in the Keystone State primary, or 60,271 votes, according to the Associated Press. Uncommitted PA, a coalition of individuals and organizations in the state opposed to Biden's support for Israel's war against Hamas, urged Democrat voters prior to Tuesday's election to write in uncommitted. They have considered it a massive write-in victory. This is interesting because, whatever reason, there's people that are still voting for Nikki Haley, whatever the reason is. This is a scenario where you're starting to see the left and how far it's gone in their stance on Israel, how opposed they are to Israel. The numbers when you start to add these up. Now, if you recall, and I had the piece for you yesterday on the program, where Ryan Zickraff said, meet the new left who think Hamas are good and the swastikas are woke. That ties in when I was talking about the college protesters, about how this is the cool thing to do, to be anti-Israel. Many not knowing what they're saying or doing, but that's the cool thing to do. Same here, these protesters writing in uncommitted for Biden, that shows you how many in the Democrat Party have now accepted this new position on Israel. Or I don't know if it's a new position, but that is finally bubbled up. Speaking of Biden, I know I'm rushing a couple things here because we've got Assemblyman Phil Palmesano coming in. I want to make sure we get to all the news before we talk to him. But this happens every great once in a while. It happened to Obama as well. When Obama or Biden don't give a lot of press speeches or speeches to the press or interviews or those type of things, they'll come out about once a quarter and say they've got to be more friendly to the press, but nothing's really done about it. But the New York Times did blast Biden for avoiding questions from journalists. Quote, for anyone who understands the role of the free press in the democracy, it should be troubling that President Biden has so actively and effectively avoided questions from independent journalists during his term. The president occupies the most important office in our nation, and the press plays a vital role in providing insights into his thinking and worldview, allowing the public to assess his record and hold him to account. This is from the New York Times. The New York Times, far left, they're not happy, and there's been some pushback on this. They did the same with Hochul for different reasons. They're not happy, and rightfully so, that Biden is going back to kind of the basement mode. Don't take questions, keep your speeches down. But I'll continue. Mr. Biden has granted far fewer press conferences and sit-down interviews with independent journalists than virtually all of his predecessors. It is true that the Times has saw an on-the-record interview with Mr. Biden as it has done with all presidents going back more than a century. If the president chooses not to sit down with the Times because he dislikes our independent coverage, that is his right, and we will continue to cover him fully and fairly either way. The New York Times would be favorable to him. That's what's so interesting. It goes back to the Super Bowl interview. He turns down these things that you would think would be beneficial to prove that, no, I'm okay. But the Times continue, however, in the meeting with Vice President Harris and other administration officials, the publisher of the Times focused instead on a higher principle. The systematically avoiding interviews and questions from major news organizations just undermine an important norm. It also establishes a dangerous precedent that future presidents can use to avoid scrutiny. So there you go. We got to take a short break because the Assemblyman is coming in. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom, and we are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. And in that Hesselson studio is Assemblyman Phil Palmesano. Good morning, Phil.
Good morning, Frank. Good to be with you again.
I'm glad that you could be back. We've been talking about the budget a lot. Obviously, we've been talking about a lot of things going on in the news, but the budget has been a big issue, so I'm glad that you could sit down. We promised the viewers that you would. It's Phil Friday, so let's talk about the New York State budget. Let's start with, we normally do good, bad, and the ugly. I'm going to start today, get it out of the way. Let's talk bad. What do you think?
Oh, we can talk bad. If I could just kind of give a 30,000-foot analysis.
Sure. Oh, yes, of course.
When the governor announced her budget back in January, she said she was going to be better and more affordable for New Yorkers. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, it failed to do that. The fact of the matter is New York families and businesses are still facing a public safety, an affordability, and a quality of life crisis in New York. We still have some of the highest taxes in the nation, some of the most burdensome and costly business and regulations. We're still dealing with the impacts of inflation and higher prices, whether it's at the pump or at the grocery store. And also what this budget does is continues the implementation of a radical energy climate agenda that seeks to dismantle the affordable and reliable natural gas infrastructure supply and delivery system. Which goal is to take away consumer choice on how you heat your home, cook your food, power your buildings, and the vehicle you drive, which will simply lead to and jeopardize the reliability of the grid, lead to blackouts, and really, in my opinion, it's going to continue the nation-leading out-migration of more New Yorkers leaving our state.
There was a great article, and I saw it on Empire Report. I don't know who wrote it, but that's what they said. Will this budget keep people here? And the answer is simply no.
No, not in my opinion. First of all, let's talk about spending. It just continues on that pathway of uncontrolled and unsustainable spending. Mm-hmm. This budget we passed was $4 billion more than the governor proposed back in January. So it's a $237 billion budget. That's $8 billion more than last year. Just since 2019, since one-party control took over, the budget has increased by 40%, like $60 billion. Wow. $60 billion. And this is finishing up my 14th year. When I started, our overall budget was the first year was $133 billion.
Well, it's still a lot of money, but
it's still a lot of money. But I mean,
now we're at $237 billion.
So it's just, I mean, I think part of my concern with that is the public, small businesses, they're showing fiscal restraint, and making tough decisions each and every day. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, my colleagues in government, the one-party control, does not want to do that, and I think they think it's their money, not the taxpayers' money. So I think there needs to be some reality adjustment to some of my colleagues.
I mean, just an extra $4 billion. It's basically, let's just add that wasn't high enough. We're going to throw another $4 billion. And we're talking about numbers here with these budgets that not that long ago would have been more of a federal budget kind of thing. I mean, $237 billion is insanity.
And on top of it, then you get into where are your budgeting priorities?
Yeah, you're fine, Phil. Just move that a little bit.
Where are your budgeting priorities? Well, first of all, let's start. We got $2.4 billion for the migrant crisis in New York City. That's on top of the $1.9 billion that was provided last year. Mm-hmm. Then again, they continue to double down on the Hollywood film tax credit at $700 million. I brought this up on the floor again. I mean, my problem is, I know that they say it helps jobs and pays for jobs, but it also covers top line expenses. So we're still subsidizing the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. So part of his salary is technically could be subsidized by the taxpayer. The other one that really kind of gets me and for the viewers. We've been subsidizing Saturday Night Live since its inception. I mean, to the tune of over, I think, $50, $60, $70 million they've received in tax credits. Wouldn't we rather have that money go better for education, for roads and bridges? But what I say on the floor is like, how do we start out the show every week?
Live from New York. They're not moving. If there's a show that's not going to move from New York, it's Saturday Night Live.
Goes, we're not seeing live from Saskatchewan, live from New York. They're not leaving. So why do we continue to fund this program? That's more misplaced priorities when it comes to the budget situation. The other area that certainly I'm very, very concerned about is this budget authorizes the governor to shut down up to 5 correctional facilities with just 90-day notice. This has been done a number of times in the past. Just since 2019, 11 correctional facilities have been shut down. And every time they shut them down during that period of time, they use this 90-day notification. 1-year notification is difficult enough for families, the employees, and for the communities that are impacted by these closures. But a 90-day notification is an insult, a slap in the face to these brave men and women who work a dangerous job to keep us safe.
And we're begging for corrections officers. Yes, we need corrections officers, and then she does this to basically discourage more people to get from getting in the field.
I don't think this helps because I said this on the floor. I said this during hearing one House budget. I've known corrections officers. They were at Livingston Correctional Facility, which closed in 2019. Then they went to Gowanda out in Erie County. That closed down. Then they came more to Southport in Chemung County. That closed down, so they went someplace else. And now that you have another round of closures, how is that going to help recruit and retain people to stay or even go into the field? And my other problem with this issue, Frank, is, and for you is during the budget hearings, the Commissioner Doc said the reason they're closing down these facilities, usually technically they used to say is because the prison population is declining. And actually the prison population increased last year by like 1,400 people.
So there goes
I think
excuse.
That's part of the whole plan with now that's really through COVID with some of these people that were released and not being charged. I mean, that's adding up. But he said that they were closing down because they have a workforce crisis, shortage crisis. I mean, we also have a workforce shortage crisis in the healthcare industry. We don't, with nurses and CNAs and others, we don't say, let's shut down hospitals and nursing homes, do we? And you cram them into fewer facilities. No. We offer retention bonuses, recruitment bonuses, give them better pay and benefits, and show them that we have their back so they don't have to jeopardize us. And unfortunately, the consequences of these prison closures, coupled with some other failed policies like removing the ability to restrict and separate the most dangerous inmates from the rest of the general population through passage of the HALT Act, has really seen a spike in violence inside our correctional facilities with no governors, no administration has it dealt with. Just since 2011, we've also closed more than 25 correctional facilities. During that period of time, inmate on staff assaults have increased 197%. Wow. Inmate on inmate assaults have increased 217%. And also during that time period, contraband seizures have increased 53%. But if you just look at the last 2 years since the implementation of HALT, inmate on staff assaults are up 42%, or 500 more than they were the previous year. And inmate on inmate assaults are up over 90%, or 1,000 more. These are all record high numbers.
Right.
And all this, in my opinion, the prison closures with taking away important tools and resources for our corrections officers to do their job has really created a dangerous powder keg environment inside our correctional facilities. And no one wants to seem to address that. And it's just, have these 90-day closures. I mean, it's time long past due we treat our brave correction officers as heroes and treat them with the respect and dignity that they deserve. Because these 90-day closures, these are people, these are families. Yep. And to think you can uproot your family, find a new home, new school for your kids, and everything else in 90 days is not a good way to show these employees that you have their backs like they have our backs.
And when you become a corrections officer, it's not like you've joined the Army where you have to go to a new base. I mean, that's almost what this is turning into.
Right. We know people that are commuting 2 hours to work now. And then on top of it, you talk about they get mandated overtime, double shifts, 16 hours, and getting personal time taken away from them. Mm-hmm. So it's like a perfect storm.
It really is.
All this does not help to lead to a higher recruitment of our corrections officers in our systems. We should give them better pay, better benefits, recruitment and retention bonuses. Yeah. We should look at their,
and start treating them with respect instead of this.
That would be a good start. Yeah. So they don't have to wonder, this year budget, am I going to have to look for another job?
Right.
And it's just, there's a lot of uncertainty. And most people in the workforce want to stay in an industry if they knew their job was on the block every other year, and this is concerning to me. So this is a big thing. Our corrections officers, they do a great job for us. So if you're a corrections officer and you're listening, thank you for what you do for us each and every day. I always talk about the Elmira. People drive by that hill and they see that facility, but they don't want to know what's going on inside there.
Right.
They don't. And just like there's crime on the streets, there's crime and assault happening inside our correctional facilities by the inmates that are locked up, on our brave men and women working in corrections, on civilian staff, time and time again. And even a sexual assault against a correction officer in the law is deemed a misdemeanor. It's now deemed a felony. So what? But we continue to do all these other things to make it an assault against a transit worker, more of a penalty, but not for our corrections officers. What does that say? So I just get very frustrated. This prison closure area is, can have has damaging effect on our communities, but on those families and the individuals, and it's just leading to more dangerous work environment for our brave men and women working inside there right now.
It's true. We got to take a short break. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Phil Palmesano after this. We are back, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. I'm your host, Frank Akam. This is Frankly Speaking. First, a couple of comments, and we've got Assemblyman Phil Palmesano in the studio. But the first comment was before you came on, Phil. But frankly, we need the Dwayne Eddy plaque for his childhood home. We've got some things in the works about Dwayne Eddy, because today is Dwayne Eddy's 86th birthday. Corning native, Rock and Roll Hall of Famer.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Dwayne Eddy. He's in Nashville. Maybe he's watching on YouTube. But yes, we're working on some things. So stay tuned. I'll keep you informed. All right, the next one's, this is for you, Phil. If New York doesn't fund Jimmy Fallon and Saturday Night Live, how can they be sure that they will make fun of and push misinformation about Republicans? That is true.
Right.
It is pretty. They're both very, very slanted.
I mean, it's just. I mean, I think the Saturday Night Live really gets me, because
I know.
The show's never going to go anywhere, and they think that it's been tens of millions of dollars. I can't remember the number. I think it's almost over $50 million since its inception.
Mm-hmm.
And again, budgeting is all about priorities, and we're talking about priorities.
Yeah.
I mean, a $237 billion budget, and we're at $700 million for the Hollywood film tax credit, $2.4 billion for migrants, but yet we had to fight to restore education aid and restore CHIPS aid, things of that nature. It just shouldn't be that way.
And I do want to talk. Well, we can go whenever order. These are not ranked. We're just giving you the bad in general.
Right.
So I don't want people to think we're ranking them. But I know CHIPS has always been something that you and I have talked about extensively on the program.
Sure.
Good, bad.
Well, if you want to say it, I mean, in my opinion, overall, it's bad. And I spoke on the floor about this. I voted against that bill. Because one of the main reasons is because all it did was restore the funding. Now, it's great that we restored the funding to $60 million. It was a 10% cut. It would have been devastating to our local communities. So that's good we restored it. But the problem is, it's not enough.
No, because I think we talked about in the past, we're seeing such an increase in fees or with inflation,
Right.
what everything costs. So really a push in this case, or to use a gambling term, a push is really a loss.
Right. It is. Well, I mean, and the statistics back it up. I mean, and the Federal Highway Administration said the highway construction cost index over the past 30 months has increased nearly 60%. I think it's 58.6% to be exact. I mean, so any funding that's going to our local highway superintendents is being eaten away by that inflation. Not to mention materials, gas, all those things add up. Mm-hmm. And on top of the fact, there's significant unmet needs. The comptroller in one of his reports back several years ago said there was $89 billion in unmet local needs, $27 billion just on our local bridges. The New York State Town Highway Superintendents Association did an update study showing there's a $2 billion funding gap in our local highway infrastructure outside of New York City. Mm-hmm. And I understand all the push when it comes to transportation aid seems to be, especially downstate, is about MTA. And I understand, I support the MTA.
Sure.
We have Alstom, Hornell, CAF, and Chemung County. I mean, these are companies that support the MTA and are good paying jobs. And I understand fully that the MTA is the lifeblood of the downstate transportation network. I get that. But CHIPS is truly the lifeblood of our upstate transportation network. Sometimes that's the only funding these local communities get to help improve their local roads, bridges, and culverts. And the other fact of the matter when it comes to our infrastructure, 87% of the roads in New York State are maintained and owned by our local municipality. 52% of the 18,000 bridges are owned and maintained by our local municipalities, and 48% of the miles driven and 40% of the gas taxes collected are from our local roads. So that's a problem. I mean, every dollar you invest in the CHIPS program saves $1 for the local property taxpayers. In my opinion, that's a form of mandate relief. Mm-hmm. Every dollar we spend in the CHIPS program saves $6 to $14 in long-term rehabilitation costs. Every $150 million we invest in CHIPS with increased funding equates to about 4,200 construction-related jobs. So why are we not making this investment? And this public safety issue. I mean, how many of us put our kids on a school bus every morning and go over a local road, bridge, or culvert? Public safety, trying to get to an emergency, it can be a matter of life or death. we're a big the wine trail, the tourism industry. But it's great, but if the local road's a mess, that's not going to help draw people in.
No, it's appropriate this time of year to talk about it because we all call it pothole season,
It
of
is.
course, and we're also well aware. So that's why this becomes almost more insulting
It is.
in the long term. Because how many of us, and I don't have the stats in front of me, but I've talked about it so often on this program, how much it costs each of us to have as a car each year hitting those potholes, what the damage that it does, and when we talk about the money that's going to migrants and the Hollywood film credit, we talk about that. It would be nice to at least get our fair share.
Yes,
in
I mean, it's
upstate.
all about parity. I mean, you look at the downstate DOT capital plan, the 5-year plan. There used to be parity. Whatever we spend in the DOT capital plan, 5-year plan would be what we spend in the 5-year-old DOT capital plan. Under one party control, the last 5-year MTA capital plan was $55 billion. We're finishing up. We're close to finishing up a 5-year, $32 billion DOT capital plan. So that right there. It just shows there's no parity. And when you talked about the damage to vehicles, TRIP is the Transportation Advocacy Group that does an analysis, said it's costing New York motorists over $36 billion annually, more than $3,600 per driver, to with road car repairs, with congestion pricing, all those types of things that are increasing the cost for the consumer. So this is just this is an investment. I think people would rather see their money fixed in their local roads, bridges, and culverts than spending on $2.4 billion on migrants, $700 million on the Hollywood film tax rate. And we're talking about the total we spend on this program is about $590 million, but yet that's to restore the $60 million with the inflation, and then we're comparing that to $2.4 billion for migrants after $1.9 billion last year. Where are the priorities? And this is a big issue. This is something Senator O'Meara and myself, we've had press conferences around the state this season. We had it was over in Horseheads with highway superintendents. My colleagues, we drove this message around the state. And in my opinion, I mean, that at least helped us get at the restoration. But I challenge my colleagues on the floor. I go, what are you doing? I mean, you're in the majority. You say you can get this money, but it's just a restoration, and that's not a win.
No.
That's just the status quo, and that's status quo when it comes to our local road infrastructure is not enough.
I hate to keep going through the bad. Phil, the other day, I want to say it was Monday or Tuesday, received a comment from a viewer, and they're doing what we've heard so many people doing, coming up with that 5-year plan that they're going to leave, that they just had enough. And I'm sure you hear it almost dead. There was a poll that came out the other day. The number doesn't stick with me. It is a huge number of people that are coming up with that 5-year plan to leave. And again, going back to the point, this budget is not going to solve that mass exodus. So what else not to keep doing this, we will get the good at some point, folks.
There's some good.
But let's talk about more bad.
I mean, I think one thing that really for me, and when I talk about budgeting, is our priorities. I mean, this issue I worked in this field many years ago, is our most vulnerable citizens, those individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. They should be a priority. And when we look at where our funding is, again, you can just compare it to the $700 million Hollywood film tax credit and the $2.4 billion for migrant. These individuals, their quality of life and the quality of care are in jeopardy. And really, it's the direct support professionals, the DSPs, the direct care workers who are really tasked with improving their quality of care and quality of life.
Right.
And so there was a rally in Albany that I attended, and the DSPs, the direct support professionals, were up there. And all they were asking for was a 3.2% COLA, cost of living adjustment, and also a wage supplement, which would have helped keep them in the field, to keep them in job. These individuals who work in this field do it because they care, but they can only do it so long when they can go across the street and work at McDonald's or Taco Bell and make more money. I mean, we need to address this. Is a crisis that needs to be addressed. And the fact of the matter, the governor put 1.5% in her budget. The compromise deal was 2.8, so they didn't even get to 3.2. And across the board, we recognize 3.2 was not nearly enough.
No.
They needed much more than that, and we could have done it if we prioritized our spending the right way. But unfortunately, this governor and this majority doesn't want to prioritize it the right way. I mean, I worked in that field. I saw firsthand the impact you can have on these individuals with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities. Sometimes these are like the adult direct support professionals don't like their family. They see them every day when they come home from services, and they're in their home. They give them hugs, they give them smiles. I mean, we need to treat these individuals better, and New York could do a much better job through our Medicaid reimbursement, through the wage issues, but unfortunately, we didn't do enough. And I just think that this budget, and that's why I got up when I spoke on the floor, I want to speak for those who can't speak for themselves. Right. Those individuals with developmental disabilities and the direct support professionals who care for them. We could and should do a much better job in dealing with this issue and our most vulnerable citizens and those individuals who are tasked with their quality of life and quality care.
And that's why it's back to priorities. It really is. We have time before we take a break for one more bad item. What do you got next?
I would say I had to go to the Rapid Act.
Yeah.
That's a few years ago, as part of the budget under one-party control, New York State implemented, as far as citing wind and solar, there used to be local control. Locals would be able to have a say in that process. They had Article 10 where they had 2 members from the locality on the board.
Right.
They changed that law and created the Rapid Act to create an Office of Renewable Energy sitting. Now that decision, they say, well, there's local input. There's really not.
No.
So if this ORS, as they want to cite the wind and solar farm, it's done so regardless of the objection to the local community. Now they're extending that same authority with no local approval to transmission, because you got the transmission improvements to deal with the mass electrification program that they want to put in place to electrify all of New York and get away from natural gas. And the other thing that scares me a little bit more on this issue is for storage, battery storage.
Yeah.
If they co-locate next to a renewable energy program, there's no local approval for this. So you can have acres of land. We see acres of land for wind and solar being taken up. Now you can have acres of land. You can have a battery field next to one of these sites that can be cited in your community with no local approval.
That's wrong.
Or input, really. And they say, well, there's going to be more input, but they don't get the final say. The state of New York, and the reason they do that is because they have to bring that power downstate.
Right.
Because the fact of the matter is 90% of our generation upstate right now is emission free.
Yeah.
But downstate is 90% fossil fuel. One of the bright things they did is they shut down Indian Point, which was clean power, provided power to 25% of the population, more than 2,000 megawatts, but they shut that down because of political reasons. And now their fossil fuel or their emissions are 90% versus 70% before the closure. So it just doesn't make sense. So this Rapid Act is just another thing that usurps the local control, local authority to meet their Green New Deal for New York.
All right, we got to take a short break. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. And in that studio, Assemblyman Phil Palmesano. Phil, one comment before we get back into the bad. Did not know that the Tonight Show and Saturday Night Live was receiving funding by taxpayers. Makes me furious. May have to reevaluate my 5-year plan. So we better only do one more bad and then move on to good, or we're going to have half the city leaving here. Phil, let's talk about good cause.
Yeah, good cause. That was a provision that was held up the budget. That was the housing. Yeah. The housing issue was
the biggest sticking point, right?
Probably seemed the biggest sticking point with the budget, with the legislative leaders and the governor trying to address. And many people were pushing for a good cause eviction, especially the socialist wing of the Democratic Party, which basically make it almost impossible to evict someone. They narrowed the scope of that down and how that would impact, how much they could increase or rent on someone. Looking at certain things,
right.
And basically it basically was going to what it puts in place is it challenges for property owners, especially small landlords, and ceding more decision-making authority to the government versus property owners being able to decide what's in their best interest in their properties. So that was something that really held up the challenge. I would say that if there's a positive that came out of that is this has always been more directed towards New York City,
right?
And the housing issues down there. And I've been down there to visit. They have some housing challenges, both from upkeep and maintenance. And that's the thing. If you want upkeep and maintenance, it takes an investment. Property owners have to be able to recoup that investment from the people that are benefiting from it. So but there are some that don't want them. They basically won't think that they can just pull money out of their pockets to pay for this. So they put in changes about how many properties you own, what types of property you own, all those things. It's really complicated mess. For people upstate New York here, it's not going to really impact them unless your local municipality opts into it. But it will impact the overall economy and housing, especially if you're talking about housing stock in New York City and others. So that's going to be. But the part of that provision I think that was positive was, if there was positive anything, it would allow for. It has to be a local opt-in. So Corning would have to opt into it. Steuben County would have to opt into it, or other towns in Steuben County. I don't see that happening, but it definitely, the overall thinking of this with this plan is really going to favor tenants and tenants' rights over property owners. And there can be a balance, but what they did, it always seems, just like on the criminal justice side, always seems to tip the scales of justice and the benefits in favor of tenants versus property owners, just like it favors I don't want to do a comparison of a tenant to a criminal unless they're a squatter.
Right, squatter, which actually a little good news out.
Yes, I should.
That's maybe a good way to segue into good.
Yes, I would say as part of the budget, there was some changes to the property law dealing with squatters, which we talked about on our last show. We've seen the high-profile issues cases where the individual came from Spain, came into the apartment, and came across two people who were there, and they murdered her. Because she came back because I think it was her mother who passed away, and they murdered her and stuffed her in a duffel bag. There was another high-profile case where the individual was at the house, watched the squatters leave, went and changed the locks, and then the cops ended up arresting her. So we had a press conference. My colleague Jake Blumenkrantz basically had a provision to change the law and define squatters as criminal trespassers and can be prosecuted under the law. So what they did in the budget didn't go far enough, in my opinion. I mean, I'll say right off the top, it does not define them as criminals or criminal trespassing, so there's no criminal penalties. So, but it basically clarifies in the law that they are not tenants. So they don't get with tenants, you have more rights when you go to court. The process can last a lot longer, but there's still, if you come across your property as a squatter, you still have to go through a court proceeding. You can't just call the police and say get them out. So it's gonna be, it should be, we hope. At least they're claiming it's going to make it easier to remove those squatters from the property in a shorter period of time, but that remains to be seen. But we do know this is a tremendous problem. In my opinion, it could have been a lot stronger, but there should have been penalties. If they come across someone who's on your property, they should be able to kick them out and arrest them. This does nothing from a criminal penalty side of things. It's all dealing with the definition of what a squatter is. It certainly is better than it was, I will say that. So I mean, that's some partial good there, but it's not as far as it could have been. So I think that was a positive thing that came about with the budget, at least, but it could have been better.
Well, and that's kind of like, and I think this is a good, so don't get me wrong, but shifting over to retail theft, I think it's good, but it's also very telling that there was an argument over having stricter penalties if you beat up a retail worker. I mean, that should have been a no-brainer really from the very beginning. So it's disturbing that was a sticking point, but I'm glad at the end of the day it was a move in the right direction.
Yes, I mean, and I think that was the thing we were trying to, I mean, I will say to the governor, I know the governor was really trying to push for this issue, so I give her credit for that. And we've been urging her to use her bully pulpit, the power of the budget to, I mean, I don't, generally, and my colleague says, I don't like policy in the budget. We'd rather deal with it separately. Because bail reform and discovery reform were part of the budget. So why not use the budget and power the budget to put those issues in? Unfortunately, we didn't get the bail reform. We still have are the only state in the union that does not allow judges the discretion to consider the dangerousness of an individual when setting bail. So, but with the retail theft, that was something we were pushing for. We certainly saw close to home the impact of retail theft crime and implications that had to our brave individual.
Exactly. That's when I think we kept bringing it up, because it isn't just like some of these things we talk about seem like New York City issues. This is not a New York City issue.
No, it's not. It's happening everywhere.
And it's causing businesses to leave or not come in.
And who would want to? I mean, the quality. It goes to that again. It goes to like I said at the beginning, my 30,000-foot analysis. It's a public safety crisis, it's a quality of life crisis, it's an affordability crisis, and it's the policies that my colleagues in government on the other side continue to advocate. But yes, there was we've increased penalties for retail theft, provide more resources for law enforcement. Hopefully, local law enforcement benefits from that as well. So that was a positive thing. Also, it increased, hate crimes. I mean, crime is crime, but they did significantly impact, like whether gang assault now can be classified as a hate crime. Sexual offenses like rape, aggravated murder. You think they would be higher crime penalties anyway, so they put them in there. So those are some positive things from that perspective. We did with the squatters. We restored the CHIPS funding, which is important. The penalties for retail theft.
And just to kind of go in that vein, it's a weird way, in my opinion, that they did it, but at least they're taking a more serious look at the pot shops, the sticker stores. That it seems, I don't really understand the minutia of it, if that's going to be as helpful, but I hope it is. What do you think?
I think so, because one of the biggest things is we were pushing for this. We had the bill last year. I remember last January we had the press conference with the law enforcement from the 3 county areas. They all came push this issue. They increased the penalties. I mean,
absolutely.
They're a scourge. They're a scourge on our local communities. I mean, listen, when we passed legalizing marijuana, I voted against it. I said there were going to be ramifications from this across the board, from public safety, public health, and then quality of life. Then you had all these illegal sticker stores
popping up everywhere.
And they're basically selling marijuana illegally. because you can't sell marijuana without a cannabis license.
It's a speakeasy, essentially.
Yes, and it's just terrible. So what we've been pushing for, the way when we passed the changes they were made a few years ago, a couple years ago, basically created this Office of Cannabis Management. They would have the authority to go and shut them down,
right?
Which did nothing. We know people, local communities are saying, "Hey, call OCM, come shut the store down. We'll get to it. We'll get to it." They were understaffed. Now, what we've been saying, let local law enforcement give them the authority to come and shut down these shops. So with this, they're going to have more authority to go do that. I think there's still got to be some consultation with the OCM.
That's what they'll
be the one. And
they'll be able to. Good.
Whether it's here on Market Street,
right?
Whether it's in Elmira, whether it's in Hornell, whether it's in Watkins
every little
store. And these stores are popping up everywhere. It's a quality of life issue. And the other thing, these are cash business transactions. Yeah. I mean, I remember talking to individuals in Watkins. If there was ever a shooting, people know there's cash in there, shooting, what would that do for the tourism industry? What would do that for the quality of life right away? So we have to empower local law enforcement to go in and shut these illegal operations and the rest of it. I want more significant penalties for them as well.
Yes.
So let's do that. So I think this is a positive step in the right direction. We want to analyze, see how it works, but local law enforcement will have that authority, but I think there has to be some collaboration with OCM. They should just be able to go in there.
That's what I guess that's why I got greedy. That's what I wanted.
So I think it's better than much better than it was.
Well, yeah. Not much could be worse.
Yeah, so I think it's a good step in the right direction. I think we'll see how it plays out, and I'll be watching places around the community to see what happens with law enforcement, how quickly they can go in there and do it.
Because I know Sheriff Allard called a long time ago to the Office of Cannabis Management and said, "Hey, put me in, Coach. I'll come and do this whenever you want." And they never even got back to him. But we got to take a short break. Last break of the hour, and then we'll be back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. And we are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Aiken. We've got Assemblyman Phil Palmesano in the Hesselson studio. A comment from a viewer. I love when Phil is on. Very good to know he's in our corner. Thank you, Phil. And that's nice. So let's get to the more of the good from the budget. And every time we say good, there's still a little preference, like a little bit of change. It's not perfect, but it's something. So how about restoring educational aid?
Oh, yes. I mean, this was a huge issue. It was probably, without question, probably one of the most important and top priorities that we had to deal with in the budget. Last year when the governor submitted her budget in January, unbeknownst to everyone, she made changes to the foundation aid formula and basically made changes on the enrollment side, which what it did and impacted is it basically half of my school districts, half of the school districts in the state ended up losing money, significant money. Like some of mine were 30%. 18%, 16%, 12%. Some were over $1 million. One was over $2.5 million in losses to the school district. And she was trying to say, well, we have to look at enrollment numbers, and we have to look at enrollment numbers. But at the end of the day, we had to do this in a thoughtful way and not just change it in the middle. So she got rid of this whole harmless provision. We had put a whole harmless provision saying a school district does not receive less money than the previous year. And why that's important? Your numbers may fluctuate, and they do. They fluctuate up. They fluctuate down sometimes. The fact of the matter is, if there's 28 people in that classroom or 25 kids, there still needs to be a teacher in there that you're paying increased salary, healthcare insurance, benefits for. You still have to pay to heat that room. You still have to pay for the maintenance on that room. So to penalize the school district because they might have a fewer kids, it's not paying for empty seats. You're paying for the space that needs to be addressed. So we were able to address that whole harmless provision and get that removed. There was an inflationary impact that impacted a number of our schools. So she wanted to change that, and then we basically got that inflationary increase. I mean, for the viewers, it might not mean a lot, like the 2.8%, but they were looking for more. So that because of the inflationary increase number didn't matter. So that affects some schools as far as the amount of aid they increased. But the biggest provision we had to address was that hold harmless, because half the schools in the state were going to get a significant cut, which was really unacceptable. And
there was no HE Act, but I was reading on Empire Report that's still a possibility. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, this goes to the natural gas.
Yep.
This is they call it the No Heat Act, and basically it's part of the plan to really dismantle the natural gas infrastructure industry, supply and delivery system. Basically, what it would do is it basically would not. There's a 100-foot rule where someone comes into a community, and people can criticize the subsidy to help to make that attachment. But certainly from a union perspective, the unions were very concerned about that. But the bigger concern from me on that act, beyond the 100-foot rule, is it would empower the Public Service Commission. They could go in to a neighborhood, and if they needed to make improvements to the natural gas, pipelines and things, they thought that they didn't want to do that, they could shut down natural gas to that entire neighborhood.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be, can you imagine?
Well,
I mean, the PSC coming in and shutting down natural gas to an entire neighborhood. I mean, we already know that 60% of New Yorkers heat their homes with natural gas. You get out to Western New York and Buffalo, it's 90%. So I know there was some concern from Western New York lawmakers on both sides of the aisle on this, and for me too. So Senate already passed this legislation. I mean, this is just, in my opinion, part of their energy plan, which you talked about ad infinitum in this one. I mean, we're shutting down, and my problem with this is you don't shut down an existing infrastructure that's working, that's affordable and reliable,
right,
without having the newer infrastructure put in place first. You don't tear down a bridge before you build a new one, but that's exactly what this governor and my colleagues are pushing for, with these, as really, in my opinion, a radical energy climate agenda. It takes affordability is not part of the discussion, reliability is not part of the discussion, feasibility is not part of the discussion, whether it can be done. And they carve out for themselves from the state perspective when you get into the vehicles. We talked about the school buses that have to convert their basically, and there is no relief for our school buses in this budget. And so that's still out there. That law is still on the book beginning in 2027. Every new bus purchase has to be an electric vehicle, and their whole fleet would have to be converted by 2035. But yet, the heavy-duty medium fleet for the state vehicles is 2040, a full 5 years after the schools have to convert their fleet. So why not to let the state do it first?
It feels like that is because the grid's not there. Everything that we've talked about, it just really does seem to me that a lot of people want to say, "Look, we did something. Here's here's the headline."
It's good to have goals, but they need to be realistic. They need to be feasible. You have to have a plan to get there. You can't just say we have to get there and the heck with everyone else.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
How it gets there. It has to be done in a realistic, affordable, reliable infrastructure. Even Doreen Harris and Basil Sagos, the co-architects of the Climate Action Council plan, who put this plan together that they're going for, said if it's not affordable for families and small businesses, it's not going to work. And I agree.
Yeah.
And even some of the changes, I mean, we talked about the HEAT Act, which could come down the pipeline. I hope it doesn't.
Yeah.
I was talking to one of my colleagues from the Senate. Says there seems to be like no appetite in the Assembly to do it, leadership, but there's 76 sponsors on that bill in the Assembly. That's all you need to pass the bill. They're all Democrats. They could pass that bill if the Speaker brings it up. So really,
that's scary.
the Speaker of the Assembly is and he's getting criticism. I hope he holds out on this because he's got to see the ramifications of this across the state, to our industry, to our manufacturers, to our families. And I'm very, very concerned about where that's heading. So thank God that wasn't in the budget provisions of that, and we're in the budget. But they could pass the whole bill, which is even actually is actually worse than what they were talking about doing in the budget too.
Now we are almost out of time, Phil, but I want to bring this up because we've been playing the videos recently about Donate Life, and of course this is Donate Life Month. Let's talk about that for just a moment before we wrap up the show, because I know that's so important to you, and thank you for the press releases you've been putting out on it.
Well, I appreciate it, Frank, and to the viewers. I mean, we did something in Albany last week, I think it was Monday or Tuesday. We had a bipartisan joint press conference, myself and the majority leader of the Assembly, Crystal Peoples-Stokes. We held this press conference, and you had Republicans and Democrats at this press conference. And she said it, I said it, this is not a partisan issue. This is a human issue. This is a common sense issue. This issue of organ donation. So we want, and she came to me a lot more at the session last year. She goes, we need to do more.
Right.
Let's engage our members more. Let's engage the capital. So we put this together. Her staff worked with my staff. We worked with Donate Life New York. And we put this together, this press conference. We had information there. We had a poster contest, and we had one of the young ladies who was there, one of the winners. And then she spoke. She stole the show.
Oh, that's nice.
Her comments, and I should send it to you to play.
Yeah, please do, because we were promoting the.
I mean, she was
contest.
Absolutely incredible. I mean, like I was sitting there, like, wow, how do you go after her?
Yeah.
And so, and she just did a fantastic job. She won the contest. She was personally touched, and that's how I think most people really get advocating on this issue. Is they're personally touched. I mean, the viewers know, your listeners know that for me it was my sister Teresa, who was a 2-time organ transplant recipient.
That one video was very powerful too.
Yeah, it was. I thought my colleague Robert Smallin lost his 14-year-old son a little over a month ago, and made the decision to donate their organs and saved up to 5 lives. They figured right now. I mean, to be able to do that and take that tragedy. I mean, you heard how with passion and emotion he spoke about this. To take this, and he's made this issue a top priority for him, and he's just so well spoken on this issue. It was so powerful. So the video our conference put together,
It's great.
I was part of it, which I was proud to be part of. My colleague Ari Brown, who donated to a Purple Heart recipient back earlier in the year, or last year, right in December, a living donation, and of course Mr. Smallin with the loss of his son AJ.
Yes.
So I mean, it's a powerful issue, and I tell people, I understand this is an issue that some people don't like to think about because you're really thinking about your own death. But really, then you hear the numbers, and I can give some of the numbers. And what if it was your mom or dad, brother or sister, husband, wife, or God forbid your son or daughter, and they would need a life-saving organ transplant? And you heard some of the numbers. Well, I'll tell you some of the numbers. So right now in New York, we have nearly 8,000 New Yorkers waiting for an organ transplant. 1,100 have been waiting for more than 5 years. There are 52 registries across the state and territories. We're 50 out of 52, only ahead of Puerto Rico and New Jersey. We have the third highest need for organ donors, but the third worst donor enrollment rate. And unfortunately, last year we lost nearly 400 New Yorkers waiting for a life-saving organ transplant. I say this time and time again, we can and we must do better. But for your viewers, the most important statistic for you to remember, if you remember any one of them, one person who donates at the time of their death can save up to 8 lives and impact the lives of 75 others through eye and tissue donation. And that's a significant legacy. I mean, when we leave this earth, what better legacy can we leave than the legacy of life? And that's something you can do. And I get questions about age. It doesn't matter how old you are. The doctors are going to make that decision. So at least it forces a discussion. So talk to your family and friends. If you're already an organ donor, great. If not, please consider signing up to be an organ donor today.
Well, Phil, thanks so much for giving us so much time this morning. I'm sure we'll be talking again soon. Plenty going on, right?
Yes.
Was it fun? It was a fun time in Albany, right?
Albany, I can think of better ways to have fun.
Okay. Everybody have a nice weekend. Join us at 6 a.m. on Monday morning, and have fun listening to some Dwayne Eddy today on his birthday, and we will see you Monday morning.